this big show. So thanks for coming to my party today. So this is our 17th year, and this is probably the biggest guest we've ever had here. The one that I personally am very nervous and excited about. A hero of mine, somebody who's a legend to any retro gamer. He created Atari, created Chuckie Cheese. He was an icon in the 80s and 90s, and he still makes games today. So he's been a legend for decades, and I'm very excited to have him for the first time ever at Classic Game Fest. He does not do many conventions. I haven't seen him much out there lately, but he's a wonderful guy, and I'm happy to have him here, Mr. Nolan Bushnell.
Engineer in the house. No, anyway. I like to talk about the OG of the video game business. And it actually happened because of a series of happy accidents. And the happy accidents are really something that I tell kids today, just do a lot of things. You never know when they're going to tie together and create something neat. Next slide. I'm going to figure this one out. Here we go. This is me at 10 years old. I was
Also, just a little closer to you.
cool.
Perfect. Can y'all hear okay in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
This is me at 10 years old, and I was a ham radio operator. And what that led to is forced entrepreneurship, because these radios were expensive. And if I took my lawn mowing money and my allowance, I would have gotten those radios when I was 35. So it taught me how to scramble and make money. And so I decided, since I was kind of technical, in those days, you only did TV repair was a house call. Well, the TV in those days cost about a month's salary for most people, so it wasn't something that they would let any kid do. But my trick was, I charged 50 cents a house call in a world in which the normal house call was $5. And some people say, yeah, let's do it. What they didn't know is I could mark up the tubes a lot. And so that was my first, what I call carnival game experience. But I learned a lot about TVs in doing that. And so that was the first happy accident. Next slide. Next slide. The next happy accident is I went to work for Lagoon, which is an amusement park. And I was pretty good at it, and they made me manager, and I had 2 arcades that I was responsible for. So I learned the cost of the coin-operated games and how much they had to make. Market research, not a lot of people knew about coin-operated games. Filed that away. Knew a little bit about televisions. Now I knew a little bit about coin-operated games. Next slide. Then I went to the University of Utah. Now, if there was a video monitor connected to a big computer, there were 3 places in the world: Stanford, MIT, and the University of Utah. Next slide. Because of this guy, Dr. Evans, he decided as part of his PhD research, what have you, he was going to experiment with hooking monitors up. This is a frame buffer that he's playing with right here. Boy. If you were to take that, it would be less than a pinhead on an NVIDIA chip right now. So anyway, I get ahead of myself. So this was a happy accident, because then all of a sudden I saw, next slide, big computer, video screen. Most computers didn't have video screens, they just had line printers. And so I got to play, next slide, Space War. This was written by a guy named, God, all of a sudden I forgot, senior moment. Next slide. Here we are, Space War. Really, really a good one. And I thought to myself at that point in time, wow, if I made a coin-operated game, if I had that monitor in my arcade and put a quarter slot on it, it'd make money. Then you take 25 cents for 3 minutes and divide it into $1 million computer, and the math didn't work. But I filed it away. Next happy accident. Oh, there's a guy that invented it. He was at MIT, and all of a sudden, I know that guy's name like the back of my hand. Oh well, doesn't matter. Next slide. This was Space War. 2 rocket ships flying around, star fields, what have you. Next slide. Next happy accident. When I graduated, I came to California and I worked for the video file division of Ampex. Why? Because I wanted to increase my skills? No. They offered me the highest starting salary. But the job I had there was to create digital signal generators, to create digital video signals for the first time. And it was a time when all of a sudden you could create video signals with TTL circuitry, transistor logic. And the chips went from $3 a piece to 25 cents a piece in the space of a year that I was at Ampex. And all of a sudden, the math worked. And that led to, next slide. Oh, this is actually the first thing. It's a little out of focus, but this is actually the first video game. It was a tennis for 2 with Brookhaven slabs. But nobody counts that. They credit me, so thank you very much. So I created a company called Syzygy. As you can tell, my marketing skills had not yet been developed. I thought it was a cool name. Last S in the dictionary, it meant alignment of planets in a thing. It also meant sex with plants some way. But anyway, that was what we thought was the name of our company, and we built, and Ted Dabney and I, we licensed our first game to Nutty Associates. Next slide. Nutty Associates. Next slide. They did a thing called the computer quiz. And it wasn't a computer at all. It was a slide pit. It was a slide machine that was a trivia question. Did pretty well. Next slide. And then we did computer space. Now, the thing I want to point out is that machine was only about 5.5 feet tall. So the model was really a tiny girl. I'm not supposed to tell you how we met her, but it's a little and the shape of the cabinet, I wanted it to be spacey. I actually did that on my kitchen table out of modeling clay, about 18 inches high. Ted, my partner, took it to a fiberglass boat manufacturer who scaled it up. And we had it. And I think it was you know, for the first video game, it's actually a pretty cool design. Pretty proud of it. Anyway. And this was how computer space worked. And it was a rocket ship and 2 flying saucers and a star field, and that was all done. And what a lot of people don't realize is this was not a von Neumann architecture. This was a state machine. This had a clock and a whole bunch of digital counters, and that's it. And gates, NOR gates. It was, you know, if you wanted to change anything in the game, you had to change the circuit board. No software involved. Why? Well, it turns out that the microprocessor hadn't been invented yet. and there wasn't, they didn't get good enough until literally 1976, 77. The first one was the 4004 in 1974, I can always remember that. But they just weren't strong enough, they weren't fast enough. So that was it. Next slide. This was the very first office of Atari. Might have been Syzygy actually at that time, because we hadn't changed the name yet until 1972. When we tried to incorporate, Syzygy had always been taken by a hippie candle maker in Mendocino. We had to change the name. And I like to play Go, and Atari is a polite warning that you're about, it's like check in chess. It also means jackpot in Japanese. You know, it's funny. When I would meet Japanese people and they'd say, "You name Atari from Japanese?" "Yes." "Oh, a bit boastful, I think." Which it was. So this was our first Atari logo. That's before the thing, the Fuji logo. Next slide. And then we came along with the Fuji logo. And that was a guy named George Opperman who ran my art department. And I just love that logo, always have. You know, so you can see the evolution from Syzygy to Atari to this Atari to this. Anyway, so a little bit down history lane. Oh, this was a roller skating rink that produced about 5,000 Pong machines. But next slide. This is what a production line of Pong machines looked like. Next slide. And then there was the Magnavox Odyssey. Now, Odyssey actually did inspire me. I thought I was the only guy in the world in the video game business. And I heard that there was a demonstration at one of the hotels. And I went up and I saw the Odyssey, and it was fuzzy, and you know, you could change the angle of the ball after you hit it, and it was really a crappy game. You know, and had no sound, had no score. And so I thought, you know, no competition here. But I looked around and people were kind of having fun with it. Who knew? So I went back, and that was the first day that Al Alcorn showed up. He was my first engineering hire. And since the technology was kind of difficult, I thought, oh, just assign him something simple. And so I described the ping pong game back and forth, you know. I actually did that. And a week later, he had it working. And we played around with it and played around with it, and pretty soon it was really fun. And I thought, yeah, maybe we can market this thing. And just to give you a little idea of the economics, typical coin-operated game machine at that time cost about $1,200 to buy. Maybe 15, depending on the complexity. The Pong board cost less than $100. The TV cost about $100, and the cabinet cost about $100. So I had a cost of about $300, and I sold them for $9. And I had a good business. And so, put it in context, this was before I'd ever heard the word venture capital. So, the whole first year and a half of Atari was buying stuff, building it into a product really fast, and selling it for cash before I had to pay for the parts. That was the whole business plan. And it worked. And we grew from 0 to $3 million that first year. The total paid in capital at that point in time was $500. I didn't know that. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. That was my partner, Ted Dabney. This was me. This was Al Alcorn. This is Fred, who stole from me. I fired him. Be careful of MBAs sporting something. Anyway, there was actually two innovations there. One was the polka dot shirt, which did not catch on. But anyway, that's what a Pong PC board looked like. Next slide. And this was the place that we did our first test. And 3 days after we put it on location, the game failed. We thought, oh no, what could possibly go wrong? We found out that it had been played so much that the coin box had completely filled up and wouldn't take any more quarters. That was a problem we could solve. This was our lobby in Los Gatos. We thought, understand that the early days of Atari and being a hippie were kind of all wound around to get each other. So we thought this was a good portal into our different universe. And we never had a product out. Oh, there's our factory. And I used to wear a tie all the time, but I don't anymore. Anyway, next slide. This is what our factory looked like. Next slide. And then we came to the VCS. Now the VCS was a von Neumann architecture. First one was based on the 6502. Now the 6502 was a very, very important microprocessor because it not only was the heart and soul of the 2600, that was the heart and soul of the Apple II. And the reason was Steve Jobs and Wozniak worked for me, and when they started Apple, they said, can we buy microprocessors? Because we were buying it for $8, because we were buying so many of them. And I said, sure, and several other things, and I feel like I was the grandfather of Apple as well. But I was offered a third of Apple computer for $50,000, and I turned it down. I've since regretted it. I just thought I'd put a little bit of chronology out here. And this is another thing. The first coin-op game, Asteroids. What else was interesting about Asteroids? It was the first arcade vector graphics machine. Raster scan was different, but with Asteroids, you get some crispness that was really, really important. Anyway, Next slide. Oh, that's a bad slide. This was Tank. Did you ever play Simon? Well, I actually invented that. It's called Touch Me, but I did it as a coin-op game. Shame on me, I didn't think about doing it as a toy. And Ralph Baer did, and so he stole that from me. I guess turnabout's fair play. Rebound, one of our big games. Next one. Space Race, pretty good game. Next slide. Quadrupon. We were doing the ball and paddle thing to death. And this is one bridge too far, I think. I think we ended up with a warehouse full of these things. But anyway, it was kind of fun. Now, this was a big savior to us. It made so much money, and we sold a cajillion of them. Next slide. Now, Breakout. Breakout was pivotal because of two or three things. First of all, it was a big game. Second, it was basically engineered. I designed it myself. But Steve Wozniak and Jobs actually built the circuit board for it. Third, it went to Japan, and Japan, Pong didn't do well in the home because it wasn't normal for kids to ask other kids to come over. So a two-player only game wasn't there. Breakout broke open the Japanese market for us, but not by Atari. We got knocked off by Nintendo. So anyway, that's another story. Quack, first time we had a light gun. Next, Pong doubles. Back in the days when we were still ball paddling things to death. This was me playing Go. I don't know why I put that in. This is our Borregas facility. This is when we were a serious company now. You know, we're probably doing 35, 40 million in sales and just feeling like we were really cool. Next slide. Now, I gotta tell you, there's a whole bunch of history in between the last slide and this slide. First of all, I sold to Warner, who proceeded to screw up my company in unimaginable ways. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and we had a board meeting in which nobody's been able to tell whether I quit or was fired. But the end result was the same. But before that, Warner didn't want, I'd started Chuckie Cheese inside Atari. That is, the animatronic figures, the stuff was all done in the Grass Valley Labs. And we had opened one store, and it was throwing off about $500,000 in earnings every year, for a year. And Warner didn't want to be in the food business. So they sold it to me for $500,000, $100,000 a year for 5 years. So I was positive cash flow day one. And so when I decided to quit or was fired, I focused on this and ran that puppy up to about 250 stores and sold it. And where a kid can be a kid. And that's Chuckie Cheese in Hawaii at our franchise meeting under this thing. And long before cryptocurrency. So, you know, funny story on that. There was a guy in Texas. No, was it Texas? I'm here in Texas. That was selling Chuck E. Cheese tokens as Bitcoin at a big discount. I think you got it. So then I entered the Transpac with my boat in '83, and I put that up not because, yes, I did win it that year, but next slide. But it led to this, because we had a sat-nav system. In those days, GPS had not been deployed yet, but there was a thing called a polar satellite, and you could actually get a fix twice a day when the satellite was dead overhead. And so latitude is easy, longitude is tough. And we had to do, since we could only get a fix every 12 hours, we had to do dead reckoning in between. And we got thinking and said, you know, dead reckoning would be really simple if we didn't have all this squishy stuff. And so we got off the boat and started ETAC, which was the very first automobile navigation system. And our software is still being used in Google Maps and all of the GPS stuff. Anyway, another little story. Then I did robots. Boy, did I lose my ass on that one. Every once in a while, when you're an entrepreneur, you say something really stupid. And I said, I can make it faster than I can piss it away. It's not true. Anyway, I could go into a long litany on this, but I won't. Next slide. Next slide. Now, at Chuck E. Cheese, I had a project called Cadaveroscope. Another not so cool name. And it was a system to do computer animation. And computer animation in those days was just sort of pie in the sky. And I had a VAX 780, which is kind of the go fast digital, scientific computer at the time. And it was taking us almost 48 hours to render a frame. Well, other than the VAX being very, very good at heating your house, it was slow when it came to that kind of computation. So one day Steve Jobs came over and I showed him around, showed him Cadaveroscope, and he asked me a lot of questions about it, and I told him, all the problems that we were having, but I said, this is definitely going to be the future. And so, about a year and a half later, he said, I've got a chance to buy Pixar from Lucas. And he said, should I do it? I said, only if you can render a frame in 15 or 20 minutes. And what I didn't know is he had created at Apple a render farm, where you basically take a whole bunch of crappy computers, lock them together, work on different parts of the picture, and get rendering. And he had rendering times down to less than 5 minutes. So he bought Pixar, and the rest was history. Next slide. I don't know why I put this one in, because that's actually a breakout board. But anyway, next slide. And then I wrote a book, published about 6 years ago. I want you to all go out and buy a couple of pieces. They're actually good. I'm working on a company called Exadexa, which is gamified education. Next slide. And I just 6 6 months ago, we released this one, which is my manifesto of how computers and education can fix the world. And I want to talk about singularity for a second, because we're all talking about it. And next slide. I don't know if you can tell. I'm doing a little bit of Atari stuff, but I'm also trying to have a little bit of fun here. So I hope you don't mind me a little bit. Go ahead off. It turns out that COVID was singularity. Like, we don't work the same way after and before. Anytime you have a pivotal shift in society, you can call it a singularity. And I believe that COVID, where it screwed things up for a couple of years, its net effect outcome is pretty beneficial. I mean, I think that my workday is twice as effective as it was before COVID. Just saying. This is another slide that I liked, but it's all kind of bullshit. AI also changes everything. Like right now, I am working on, and watch for it, I am making a series of YouTube videos totally done by AI, where it's all based on my prompts, and you'll love this. Maybe not. I'm taking all the signs of the zodiac, applying them to a person, a man, and then a woman, and push them to this extreme, so that whatever that zodiac sign is, when you push it to the extreme, if you really look at Star Wars and Star Trek and that sort of thing, it was always about some concept pushed to the extreme. And when you push something to the extreme, there's always the good, but there's also the ill. And so I'm going to take all the signs of the zodiac, create a 15-minute video clip with an individual, and I'm going to do it all with AI. So watch for it. It's a current project I have. Actually, I have 4 projects right now. One is Exodexa, fixing education. Second, an Exodexa supercharger, which is a tutoring location, physical location. Think of it as Chuck E. Cheese without pizza, but with tutoring. And I think that I can teach kids and give them labs for a very, very, very interesting cost and make a pile of money at the same time. How much time do I have?
We're probably ready to shift to the Q&A, but whenever I'm just letting you go, but
Okay, I'm almost done.
we'll shift to that soon.
Okay. And then I'm doing one more project, which is games for outside. So think about a campground. And now, instead of escape room, you have an escape trail. Instead of whack-a-mole, you have a mole meadow where you have actual moles, mechanical moles, popping out around on the ground, and you have to run around with a hammer and whack them. Think about bumper pool, miniature golf, and pinball. If those 3 had a baby, what would it be? It would be 18 weird pool tables in which you would play it with a pool cue, but there would be all kinds of lights and sounds and traps and things, so that you're playing miniature golf, but on pool tables with lights and sounds and action. Huh? Fun? What about pendulum bowling? Where instead of rolling the ball, you swing the ball and you score it just like bowling. These all can be done outside. In fact, if you look at the history of bowling, it actually started in the Bavarian forest, just like that. 9-ball, 9-pin, swinging the ball. Next slide. That's another AI thing. Self-driving cars, going to be important. I'm actually on the board of the self-driving car company, and it's going to really be fun. Next slide. Save between deaths. Next slide. Next slide. Tesla's coming with robo-taxi. Next slide. These are all the people that are going to be put out of work. So, you know, next slide. He basically says, progress is about creative destruction. Told you about saving lives, throwing people out of work. Part of the whole conundrum. Next slide. Next slide. That's pretty much. Ned Ludd, I don't want to go in that. Next slide, next slide. Next slide. Did you know that a third of young single women were telephone operators in the 1920s? Not anymore. Next slide. 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 I'm sorry, I got a little carried away there. Next slide. Do something creative. Do this. Get enthusiastic every day. Learn something brand new. And always keep up optimism. If the minute you feel depressed, look up on the web the St. Christmas Day speech from Henry V. The band of brothers, you know, the night before the Battle of Agincourt, where they were outnumbered by the French by 5-1. They won. So just say yes. Next slide. Next slide. So.
Okay, and now for everyone's interactive enjoyment, we've got a microphone. Actually, I can't see it, but one of my guys, Keon's got the microphone. If anybody has a question for Mr. Bushnell, you ever wanted to ask a question of Nolan Bushnell?
And call me Nolan. Okay.
All right, so I can't really see in the light. I'm going to stand over here. Okay, this is great. Yeah, so first question, go ahead.
Hello. So 10 years ago, I studied game design, and Atari and your career was a big part of that. And I remember one of my very old and distinguished professors, who therefore was wrong about everything, had a very favorite story to tell, and I'd love to hear it from you. It was about you sitting behind a desk, looking at Steve Jobs and saying, Steve, go to Wozniak, and for every chip you take off the circuit board, I will pay you both $5,000. And it was in between two generations of the Atari console. Is that a true story?
Very true.
Could you tell
Say again?
Could you expand on that story a bit?
Well, I didn't think Steve Jobs was a good executive. You know, in fact, my engineering department wanted to fire him. And so, when you invest in a company, you kind of invest in the team as much as the idea. And in some ways, I think had I invested, the outcome may have been different, because the guy who did invest was Mike Markle, who became the first president and was really the mentor that turned Jobs into an executive. And so had that not happened, I mean, we've all seen Back to the Future, and weird shit happens when you disrupt the timeline.
Another one up here.
Somewhere that every code name for a product was named like a hot girl in the office, and that there were all kinds of crazy parties in the back. And Atari, was that true?
That's a very firm no comment. No. The part about the chips being named after hot girls is actually not true. The chip, the custom chip for the 2600 was called Stella. And that was actually named after the lead engineer's bicycle. Yeah. And we did have beer busts on the back dock if the company hit quota. And yes, most of the people that worked for Atari at that time were in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s. And they were about half and half men and women. And so if you have half and half men and women, kegs of beer on a Friday night, I have no idea what might have happened.
Nobody will ever know. All right, any other questions? Oh,
Hey,
sorry.
I'll make it quick. So I wonder if you could talk about innovation. That's a word you didn't actually have in your slide, but there's a quote attributed to you. It goes something like, innovation has no constituency. I don't know if that's quite true, but I wonder if you could just expand on the notion, because I think you've actually got the definition of the word right. A lot of people use it when they could just say great or interesting or amazing.
I do believe that in general, true innovation has no constituency. What I mean by that is, when the automobile came along, people couldn't conceive of a world without horse-drawn carriages. And so what happens is, if you do research before the actuality, it always comes back that nobody wants a car. You know, nobody wants a video game, because what's a video game? They have no context that you plug it into. So, with Steve Jobs, we were talking one time, and he says, what do you do when you know you're right and nobody agrees with you? I said, just make sure you're right and don't worry about it, because most of the people don't have your vision. And a lot of times, the cutting room floor has a lot of good ideas because the person who presented them was not a good presenter, not because the idea wasn't good. So I think that the process is, you get a good idea, you get out of the shower, you dry yourself off, and you start researching it. Somebody who says, oh, she stole my idea, no. That person who had the idea too was too lazy to work on it. It isn't about the idea, it's about the execution. Always remember that. You don't own an idea until you work it. You climb up the mountain of reality, and you articulate it, and you create it. And any other process, I don't know. I think that success comes from hard work, not from a good idea. A good idea well executed, now that's something. I've been doing something that I would really, 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 really recommend you to do. Several years ago, I started getting up in age, and I thought to myself, you know, I want to get old, but I don't want to get dumb. So I did a deep dive on how do you grow dendrites, and that's the best thing you do. The number of brain cells you have is fixed. In fact, if you drink a lot of alcohol, it decreases over time. But you can build dendrites, and dendrites are the connective tissue that your brain is designed to grow a dendrite until it hits another cell, another dendrite, and it creates a synapse. So you're actually building your brain, a well-discovered brain weighs heavier than a lightly one. So, what do? I started doing this thing called the dice game, and it has changed my life. What I do is I have a whole bunch of slips of paper for a project that I can accomplish in 1 year part-time. I then pull 11 of them out of the hat, number them 2 to 12, throw the dice, and I have to do the one that the dice tells me. Why do it that way? Because we will cheat. If I were to choose those slips, I wouldn't choose the hardest one. And so you have to discipline yourself. What happened was about 7 years ago, I pulled one out that said, write a book. Now, math, engineering, I'm good at. The spoken word, not so. I would have never graduated college if I didn't have a girlfriend to correct my papers. So, usually when you write a book, you think, well, I'm going to get it published, and I'm going to have something to say and all that. And so, I didn't have that. All I had to do was write a book. And so, I like science fiction, so I thought I'd write a science fiction book. And it turns out I was pretty good. I had a pretty good story to tell, and everybody that read it liked it, kind of. And they all said needs a lot of editing. So my lack of spelling and grammar I can fix just through an editor. Yeah, done. And then I took it to a guy that knew the publishing world. He says, you know, your first book shouldn't be fiction, it should be nonfiction. And it should be one that only you can write, because you're the only guy that ever hired Steve Jobs. And he says, I've even got a title for you. It says, Finding the Next Steve Jobs. And so I wrote it, became published by Simon Schuster, translated into 13 languages, all because of the damn dice.
Time real quick, I want to make sure that we know that he's got to get downstairs to a signing at 3:30, so we've got about 10 more minutes, maybe a couple more questions, Keon?
Sure.
Yeah. Up here in the front, okay?
So, I always felt like the Trammels never recognized the value of the Atari clean-out edition. So my question to you is, after Nakajima died in the mid-90s, how close did you come to purchasing Atari games, and anything you want to add about those negotiations?
Oh, I came very, 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 very close. You know, for some reason, Warner, for their part, hated the idea of me buying it. Because, you know, they totally screwed it up. And they were afraid that if I got it and made it better, that it would show badly on them. You know, and so they did everything to sabotage it, you know. So, yeah, and I'm trying to figure out, I actually don't remember exactly, but I've taken 4 runs at buying Atari since then, and all of them have been screwed up latest one was when Infogrames had it, and it became a public company in Paris. And doing a hostile takeover of a Paris public company is not something you want to do. It's, boy, I lost some money on that one too. Anyway, but now, the best of all worlds, Wade Rosen, who currently runs Atari, who bought it out of there was several years of discontent. And now Wade Rosen has it. He's doing all the right things. So, hats off to him. I'm on the board of advisors, and I give him weird ideas all the time. And he actually adopts a couple of them.
That's great. Do we have maybe just one or two more questions? We want to get some people further in the back, though. Keon?
So, what do you think about the later Atari products, such as the Jaguar?
The Jaguar was really, really, really good at some things. Battery usage was not one of them. Those things, I think didn't it run on C cells? I think it ran on C cells, so it would last less than an hour. So you can't do that, and that was before rechargeable things came along. But I thought the Jaguar was a pretty good unit. Oh, you know what? I apologize. I'm thinking of the Lynx. The Jaguar had a problem with the chip. It couldn't address half the memory. And so they were up against the box, and they shipped it anyway, which says that it truncated the kind of games it could play. And if they'd have just had a little more patience and fixed the chip on a second turn, I think it would have been done much better. It would have been done better than Sega, I think.
All right, great. Any more questions back here? Just look for the microphone here. Yeah.
Has there ever been a game they made that you regret bringing upon the world?
When you're designing a game in your mind's eye, it all looks really, really fun. The first time it's actually working, you realize that half of the games you design are really crappy. And occasionally, one of those crappy games actually makes it into the market, and the market just whacks you mercilessly over the head. So, yeah, I've done some bad games.
All right, any other questions?
Make sure you hold it until it ships.
Did you ever see Commodore as actually like a problem or a competitor, or were they just someone else you thought you'd run over like a speed bump?
If you look at the timeline, it was actually after my day. I was working on Chuckie at the time, and so it was Atari's problem under the Warner guys. But I thought that the cost and everything of the PET was pretty good.
How about right here in the front, if you can speak loud enough. Sorry.
Quick question, what's your favorite game?
That's a good one. What's your favorite game?
Can't do that. I've got 3 or 4. Breakout. I have to say Pong just because it was the OG of Atari. I love Tempest. Tempest was really a tour de force. And my son did a version of Asteroids that was so good that I wanted to count that as one. But he basically projected it with a laser projector on the floor. He would then sit on a mechanic's stool with a controller, and you'd spin around, and that would be what you'd shoot. But in order to move, you moved with your legs to keep from getting hit. It was so damn fun, and you'd play for a couple of minutes and be totally exhausted. But it was a great articulation of an arcade classic. I've often thought I should bring that back and put it in an arcade somewhere.
We can still go a few more minutes. Let's see. How about right here with the hat in the front?
In between the naming of Smithie and Atari, were there any other names you had considered, or anyone else in Atari had considered? In between the renaming of Synergy and Atari, were there any other names floating around?
Yes. Back in those days, when you did your incorporation with snail mail, you had to put down 5 alternatives. So Syzygy would have been the top, which got rejected. There was number 2. Atari was actually number 3. And I don't remember what was number 2, number 4, number 5. Lost in the mist of time.
All right. Oh, sorry. We got one more in the back here. Yeah, go ahead.
When I kind of look through the history of Atari, what I kind of found strange, how could you go from making arcade games to making a very freaky looking mouse to perform at kids entertainment industries like Chuck E. Cheese and stuff like that? What inspired you to make a character like Chuck E. Cheese, and what inspired you to create an establishment like that?
When you're running a business, you can integrate towards your market, you can specialize. But the coin-operated game business was such that we were selling games at that time for about $1,500 to $2,000. In their lifetime, the coin-op business, the cash draw would be between $40,000 and $50,000. So I determined that I was on the wrong side of that equation. So I wanted to create a series of arcades. I also knew that kids loved to play the games that didn't have a good place. They didn't go to bars. Bowling alleys were a little bit rough. And so the mall arcades were sort of taken over by the teenagers. So I felt that there was a strong market. And so I wanted to build the arcade. Pizza was the right thing because there was wait time. But the most successful pizza parlor in the area was actually one called Pizza and Pipes, which they had a deconstructed Wurlitzer theater organ, with the cymbals and the pipes and everything all around on the walls. And I thought, I can't grow a chain like that. But then I went to the Tiki Room at Disney and I said, my engineers can do something like that. And so we just did some simple robotic characters, put on a show, primarily for the kids, but as much to keep the parents, because the kids were happy to be in the game room. And the whole thing worked really well, but that's kind of how it came to be.
All right, well, that is going to be all of our time for today. So let's hear it for Nolan Bushnell. Thank you so much.